You could have a pretty serious case of metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance, and you wouldn't even know it, because your A1C is not all that bad. There's kind of a simpler way of checking it out yourself. It's not perfect, but it'll give you a pretty fair idea of where you stand. And also, we'll look at the question, who are the smartest people who leave comments under my Beat Diabetes videos? I want you to know that I do have another YouTube channel. It's called by my name, Dennis Pollock, and on this channel, I teach the Bible. I do short little 6- and 7-minute devotionals normally on all kinds of Bible topics. If you're having a rough week and need some encouragement, or you just want to know what does the Bible actually say, you need to check out my Dennis Pollock Bible channel. There'll be a link in the description below. Here is a comment where the individual says the real conundrum is this: insulin resistance is like water behind a dam. Everything seems perfectly okay when there's no water behind the dam. Well, it is. They say, then the water builds up behind the dam and everything still seems okay. You wouldn't even know from the other side of the dam how much water is back there. Then maybe water starts trickling over the top and we may get a warning that something is up. Or maybe the dam will burst. So what we need to do is look behind the dam before we get into trouble, and if we can, do something about it early. Well, that is so perfectly true. Find out what's going on in your own body. I was with a young guy when I was doing a test for a video I was making about diabetes, and we were at a donut restaurant, and I was deliberately trying to show what you do with a donut, which is throw it in the trash, trying to make a point. I said to this other guy who was much, much younger than I was, I said, would you like me to buy you a couple donuts and then I'll test you, an hour later and we'll see what it does to your blood sugar? And he said, sure. So he ate 2 donuts and his blood sugar rose up to 200, around there. I can't remember the exact number, but it was around 200. And this guy was relatively young. He was slim, but he was able to get a glucose spike of up to close to 200 with 2 donuts. And I knew that guy had problems. I knew that the beginnings of metabolic syndrome were already at work in his body. If you can spike your blood sugar up close to 200 with any high-carb meal, you've got problems. That should not be. You shouldn't have to go that high, even if it is a high-carb meal, if you're perfectly healthy and have no insulin resistance. So if you say, well, how do I know whether there's any water behind the dam? How do I know whether there's problems lurking ahead for me? One way is to do some post-meal blood sugar tests. Eat a high-carb meal. See how high your blood sugar will go. If it gets up to 135, 140, and you've eaten quite a few carbs, not too bad. But if it shoots up to 185, 190, 200, over 200, even if your A1C is really good, there's water behind that dam. There's problems ahead for you, my friend. All you have to do is just live out a few years and they will manifest themselves. And another issue that can show that you've got some water behind the dam is when your blood sugar goes too low. And that was happening with me. Not only was I getting high blood sugar, but several hours after I would eat a high-carb meal, it would dive down into the 50s and 40s, and sometimes lower still. And if your blood sugar is diving down that low, 50s, 40s, 30s, which is really, really dangerous, 40s is really, if it's diving that low, you got problems. It doesn't matter whether your doctor says A1C is great, fasting glucose, perfection. If you are bouncing all over the place, you've got problems. You've got insulin resistance, and your body's not processing carbs and glucose the way it should. You know, when everything is humming along perfectly, there'll be a much smaller range from your highs to your lows. You may bounce up to 125, 130 after a meal, and you may drop down to a fasting glucose of 85, 80, maybe 75 in a few cases, normally not. But there's a fairly tight range. It's kind of like a thermostat. You know, with most of our modern thermostats and heating and cooling systems here in America, there is a small little range for our temperatures. If I set my temperature at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, then what that means is, let's say it's in the winter, so the heater is the one that's going to kick on and go off. So I set it at 70. What's probably going to happen is my temperature in that house the furnace will kick on and kick it up to about 71, 72 and stop and let it drift down 71, 70, 69, and usually about 1 or 2 degrees below what I set the temperature at, it'll kick back on and knock it back up. So maybe from 72 as a high down to 68 as a low, I've set the thermostat at 70. Very tight range. Up to 72, down to 68. Furnace kicks on. Back up to 72, drifts down to 68. Furnace kicks on, and so forth. That's sort of how your metabolic system is supposed to work. Now, it's not a 4-point range. You know, it's going to be wider than that. But again, maybe from 85 or 80 up to 125, 130, that's how it's supposed to work. If you test your glucose after a meal and it jumps up to 200, you've got problems. And they may not manifest fully for a while. You may feel perfect, eyesight is perfect, circulation is good, A1C is good, fasting glucose is good. You're not urinating all the time, you're not constantly thirsty, your eyes aren't fuzzy. You know, you've got no symptoms at all. But there are problems. There's water behind that dam that's going to break through. And all you have to do to see those problems is just live out a few years. It might be 10 years. It might be 15 years. But so much smarter to cut it off before it ever becomes a real issue. Because even when your glucose is under pretty good control, you're probably going to have high insulin, and that in itself can cause damage. And that's how I got my warped fingers from arthritis. I got it at a time in my life when my A1C was good, when my fasting glucose was good, when no doctor in the world would have told me I was diabetic. And yet, because of high insulin, I was having inflammation, I was having arthritis, I was having irritable bowel syndrome, I was having several different issues, and it just kept getting worse, and various other issues popped up, and eventually the glucose is bouncing all over the place. There was water behind the dam for me, much earlier than when everything just fell apart. And so, honestly, the smartest people that I see making comments under my videos are the ones who say, well, I'm not diabetic, but I don't ever want to be, and that's why I watch your videos. I think, man, I wish I could have been that smart, back in the day. I wasn't, and I just ignoring everything and just assuming everything would be fine. And of course it wasn't, but now, thank God, it is once again.